All right, welcome into Bay Area Sports Insiders. Glad to have you here for our in-studio premiere. I'm Courtney Cronin of the Mercury News. This joint venture between the Mercury News and East Bay Times kicking off this week. We figured what better time to bring you our first episode than Draft Week. The war rooms have been prepped across the country, and on Thursday, teams will find out their future with their first round picks. The San Francisco 49ers coming in at number 2. Or are they? Joining me now, Bay Area News Group 49ers beat writer Cam Inman. The talk for the last few months, Cam, has been whether the 49ers are going to keep that pick at number 2 or shop it around. They've been doing that for quite some time. General Manager John Lynch meeting with the media saying he either wants to find a cornerstone at number 2 for the franchise or push that pick somewhere else and go a little bit further into the draft. For a while, we've heard the name Solomon Thomas, a defensive end from Stanford, thrown around. But what the 49ers do at number 2 depends upon a lot of what the team ahead of them does. The Cleveland Browns drafting at number 1 for the second straight year. How does what they do affect if the 49ers are going to potentially take Myles Garrett if he's still available?
Well, I think everybody's going under the assumption that Myles Garrett's going to go number 1 overall. So there's not a clear consensus number 2. And so, yes, there's talk about possibly Solomon Thomas from Stanford. But John Lynch has been shopping this pick for months. He just wants to get a lot more extra picks is what the 49ers need to replete their roster. I mean, last night I was following up a rumor that I had heard that they were going to trade the pick to the Browns for the Browns' 12th spot. It wasn't true, but you're going to hear a lot of that all the way up until draft night, I believe, because the 49ers are active. They want to get more picks than they can. I don't think that they've settled on one guy in particular. They have a couple avenues they can go with number 2, Myles Garrett. They would take him if the Browns decide to pass on him for a quarterback. But the 49ers obviously need a lot to recover from a 2-14 season.
And what they need is a quarterback to build upon for the future. The question, is it wise to pick a quarterback at number 2 given the value of some of the quarterbacks in this draft? We hear the name Mitchell Trubisky from North Carolina, Deshaun Watson also being thrown into that mix from Clemson. Is there a chance that we see them using their pick on a signal caller instead of what most would consider the best player available?
I think that's absolutely a consideration. These guys are not highly thought of around the league necessarily because Trubisky's only had 13 starts. Deshaun Watson. A lot of these guys are coming out of spread offenses, and they're going to be going into a very complex offense under Kyle Shanahan. How are they going to be able to translate to that? The number 2 pick traditionally goes to quarterbacks, guys that sack quarterbacks, and guys that protect quarterbacks. Another option the 49ers might want to consider is a running back because Carlos Hyde is not under contract for next season. And he's been injury prone, so maybe they go after Leonard Fournette. I would love to see what they would do if they would shake the whole draft up if they went with Christian McCaffrey number 2 overall, because most people are like, well, he might be a first round talent, maybe he's a top 10 talent. Is he a top 2 talent? I don't know, but Kyle Shanahan would certainly know how to use him.
That would certainly be the bombshell of the draft in that early round if they went with a Christian McCaffrey, whose draft stock has been rising considerably within the last few weeks. How does he compare to a guy like Leonard Fournette? Obviously, you have the versatility there with McCaffrey. They could use him as a receiver or as a running back to give Carlos Hyde some support this coming season. But Leonard Fournette, arguably the best running back in the entire draft. And he recently visited with the 49ers.
And Fournette is a power back. This guy, he was on everybody's radars the last couple of years. Everybody became aware of what he was doing at LSU. McCaffrey is... He was so dominant at Stanford because he's so quick and he can be used as a receiver, which is something that Kyle Shanahan likes to use with his running backs. He can also do special teams and be a punt returner. And obviously John Lynch knows him quite well from his father, Ed McCaffrey, too. So Stanford guy as well. So there's that connection. I think that's pipe dream, though. But I do like the idea that the 49ers would go with an offensive skill position player rather than a defensive lineman for a third straight year.
So something that could potentially shake the draft up even more than going with Christian McCaffrey there at number 2, taking a look at the 49ers' hole in the defensive backfield. Now, they've drafted a lot of cornerbacks in the last few years, not this regime, the former regime. 11 cornerbacks in 7 years for Trent Baalke. And there's been some recent news, Tremaine Brock being released for the allegations of domestic violence earlier in April. Jimmy Ward potentially the move to safety this coming season. How do they approach this, knowing the pieces that they had at cornerback last year? Rashard Robinson, clearly a front runner to potentially earn that starting spot.
Right.
But there's also some holes. Keith Reeser, we don't know about Will Redmond because we didn't see him play last year. How do they approach that?
I think you do need a new starting cornerback, obviously, because Brock's gone. So do you say, do we need the starting quarterback more than we need a new single high safety? Because that's the other spot in the secondary that they have to look to fill under this new defensive scheme where you leave one safety back deep, and that's what they're going to try to convert Jimmy Ward to. And Jimmy Ward he has experience playing safety in college and high school. He's been playing cornerback the last couple years. The 49ers want to shift him out into safety. But do they look at Malik Hooker from Ohio State or Jamal Adams from LSU? Again, DBs don't usually go 1-2 in the draft, and there's never been a cornerback that's gone number 3. There's only been one DB that's gone number 2, and that was Eric Turner years and years ago. So I don't know if the 49ers would be willing to make that kind of a historical leap when there's other positions of need.
All right, so Thursday coming up, and the 49ers picking at number 2. Cam will be down in Santa Clara for the NFL draft for the entirety of it during the 3 days. Be sure to give him a follow on Twitter, and he will keep you updated on draft night. We turn now to the Oakland Raiders, who finished their season in the AFC wildcard game and then spent most of the offseason with some free agency pickups on offense. Obviously, they now need to address the hole left by Latavius Murray, who signed with the Minnesota Vikings during the free agency period. We'll get to that and Pandora's box and all that will lead to. But defensively, it's the main focus for the Oakland Raiders to be able to find some support for some key areas that they just did not have that support in last year. Starting out, Jerry McDonald and Jimmy Durkin, our Oakland Raiders beat writers, we're going to start talking about the number one need, the top priority. Raiders picking at 24, an inside linebacker is clearly not an afterthought by any stretch. But for Reggie McKenzie, if he goes with this route, that's brand new for him. He's not used to picking a guy that high. What's the likelihood, Jerry, you think that happens?
I think it's real likely. I mean, I think that they need that position so desperately that I think when they get upstairs, Reggie always says that they go for the best available player, but I think in this case it'll almost be like a Ouija board up there, and it'll move to inside linebacker, and it'll say, well, hallelujah, the number one guy on the board is an inside linebacker. And I think it'll be someone like Jared Davis of Florida. Mm-hmm. If Reuben Foster were to drop to there, that'd be something to consider. There's Zach Cunningham of Vanderbilt. Mm-hmm. But my mock draft, I think I'll have Davis going number 24 to the Raiders.
This is a skeleton crew, Jimmy, that was left over now with the inside linebackers, with the potential of whether they're going to bring back Perry Riley Jr., who became a starting middle linebacker kind of maybe midway through early in the season in 2016. But they certainly, outside of that number 24 pick, if they do go with an inside linebacker, they've got a lot more work to do at that position. Do they compensate for it in some later rounds or potentially, even further into the offseason?
Well, they have to bring in at least a couple of guys. I mean, Reggie McKenzie said, I'm going to get at least 2 before we play here in September. It's a position that him and Jack Del Rio obviously know. They played it in the NFL, so they know what goes into inside linebacker play, and that's kind of what has led to their philosophy of drafting guys in the 5th round like Ben Heaney, Corey James. Those are guys that they feel like they can get in and try to mold into the linebacker that they need. Now, that hasn't worked out very well, and that's why they're in a position where there's nobody on that roster that I'd feel comfortable with starting when they go into Tennessee on September 10th. So they're going to bring in at least one guy, probably 2 in the draft, and they're going to check the waiver wire and explore trades, and they have to upgrade that position.
And at this time last year, the big hole that they were trying to fill, or at least compensate for during the offseason, was bolstering up some needs at corner. Big contract for Sean Smith, bringing him from Kansas City, and then a big extension for David Amerson. Safe to say both underperformed in the 2016 season. Now, this is a draft of big physical corners and somebody that they might want to bring in as that nickel corner to potentially give these guys some competition. How do they approach that? Could that potentially jump or at least trump the need for an inside linebacker right away? Or do you see them picking with their second pick for a cornerback?
Well, I think there's a lot of corners that they can go after, and so if it's me, I'm looking at as more of a second round pick. But if McKenzie does go straight on that board and there's a corner that's higher than a linebacker, then that's what he could do. And that's a guy that we all know the nickel cornerback spot that used to be just kind of a backup role. That's an important spot on a defense nowadays. I mean, that's basically a starting role. So if you've got a guy, maybe an Oakland native like Kevin King, you can bring him in as your nickel, and then next year when Sean Smith and David Amerson, the guaranteed money on their deals comes off, you can consider moving on from those guys, and a guy that you draft early here can be ready to step into a starting job.
Nothing like a little competition to make guys work for their money going into the 2017 season. So at the end of last season, we see that the Raiders are at the bottom of the NFL in terms of where they finish with sacks, 25 total, most of those coming from the edge. Guys like Khalil Mack, Bruce Irvin, they did not consistently establish that interior pass rush. Jerry, how do they approach this now, given about last week they free up some cap space by releasing defensive tackle Dan Williams? It's about $4.5 million towards the cap. This isn't a great class for defensive tackles and interior guys, but where do you foresee the Raiders going with this within maybe the second or third round?
Well, I mean, I think the only first rounder that would be even considered would be like Malik McDowell, but I don't know that his motor, the way how hard he plays, is going to be something that they would be interested in. So I think, yeah, they will be looking at subsequent rounds for an inside player and someone to provide push. But they're also going to be looking hard and crossing their fingers that Mario Edwards can stay healthy and that Jihad Ward, a second-round pick who they took last year, who really played a lot but didn't do a lot, that those guys can step in and play. I mean, they're pretty big on trying to develop their own guys that they've drafted, and that will be a big thing for them.
Okay, so back a couple months ago, Latavius Murray parts ways with the Raiders during free agency. That leaves a big hole there. The Raiders trying to bring in someone to support DeAndre Washington, last year's 6th-round pick, I believe, 5th-round pick, and then Jalen Richard. They want that three-headed monster back there. Pandora's box. It's wide open right now with Marshawn Lynch, who, as far as we know, is not currently in the country, and there's no deal done yet. It opens up a lot of different questions for the Raiders going into this draft. Jimmy, how do they handle that if he doesn't get signed by Thursday? And we know that they're probably not going to take a running back that first day anyways, and that would be later. Can they get it done this week?
Well, I mean, Reggie has said he's not going to close the door if it's not done by the draft, but he might, and that's kind of the thing. It's in Marshawn Lynch's, it's in his court. I mean, does he want to play, and does he want to play for the money that the Raiders are offering? I was always skeptical of this deal happening just because he's 31. He's coming out of retirement to take a beating. He's going to want a good dollar figure. So if they can't come to terms and bring him out of retirement, then yeah, they definitely address it in this draft. There's a lot of guys. It's a very, very deep draft for running back. They can get a guy on day 3 like they did last year in DeAndre Washington, and they just need to find a guy that's a bigger body, a power back to complement those two faster guys.
Marshawn wanting a lot of money, might also want a new endorsement deal with Skittles. That all remains to be seen. But a name that came up, a kind of controversial name, Jerry, for the Raiders in the last few weeks, Jack Del Rio, Reggie McKenzie meeting with the media to discuss what their mindset is going into this draft. Joe Mixon, an Oakley native, so he's a local guy, former University of Oklahoma running back. He's probably the most controversial name in this draft, just given some of the off-the-field stuff with the domestic violence assault allegation. Reggie, what did you take from what Reggie McKenzie said to the media just about, the potential that they're willing to look at him, given, there are these off-the-field concerns and how the Raiders, their stance on, Mark Davis's stance on domestic violence itself. Does it complicate things? Or, how do you think they're going to evaluate him if he's still available where they want to pick him?
Well, I think if you look at Reggie McKenzie's track record, there's not much of a history of him ever sitting up at a podium at any situation and saying, I don't like this kid or we don't want this guy by name, and actually, besmirching a guy's reputation,
Sure.
so to speak, publicly. He's going to keep that to himself. I would still be a little skeptical, unless maybe if he lasted till day 3. But from what I understand, that's not going to happen. He may not get out of the second round. So I would think that given the Mark Davis's stance, public stance, that he would have a hard time, trying to explain Joe Mixon.
All right, Jimmy and Jerry are going to be in Alameda on Thursday. Be sure to give them both a follow as they keep you updated on the latest from Raiders headquarters, and it has not been a quiet offseason whatsoever here in the Bay Area. A lot of news for the Raiders in their move to Vegas, 49ers, the new regime down in Santa Clara. And there's some big picture issues here with the NFL draft. So we figured what better time than to bring in our sports columnists, Tim Kawakami and Mark Purdy, to talk about some of those things. So there's not really a need right now for the Raiders or the 49ers to panic about their situation at left tackle. They've got two longtime veteran guys, Donald Penn for the Raiders entering his 12th season and Joe Staley entering his 11th season for the 49ers. So there's needs ahead of that. But you have to think towards the future, Tim, and how both these teams would handle it. How do you think the Raiders go about in some of the later rounds trying to find that replacement for Staley?
49ers. The amazing thing with all the holes they've got in the roster, almost every other position except for tackle. Joe Staley on the older side, but he's got some value. If you want to bring a young quarterback at some point, you can protect that blind side. And then Trent Brown on the other side is a younger player, right tackle, who I think might have the feet, might have the talent to move over to left tackle at some point. There's not a desperate need there. They got a desperate need at quarterback, at every other spot you want, defensive line, linebacker. Maybe not at left tackle, maybe not at tackle overall. I don't think they need to force anything there. Maybe in 3 years when Joe Staley's retired, you have to go look for somebody. You don't have to do it now. You have so many other holes. They're going to be 4-12 almost no matter what they do. They have Joe Staley for now. Figure it out down the road. Fill your roster with good players at other spots where they don't have anybody. I don't think tackle right now. This isn't a great draft for tackles anyway.
Sure.
I just don't see the 49ers forcing anything. Maybe a later round, certainly not early.
Yeah, and as Tim mentioned, Mark, outside of Cam Robinson, which we know is going to be a surefire number one pick for a certain team,
I'm actually in favor of panicking, by the way. I think they should panic, and I'm going to encourage Tim to write a panicky column, as I intend to do on Thursday.
So your panic with the Oakland Raiders, where does it come from in terms of Donald Penn? He's just coming off of a Pro Bowl season.
Because guys get hurt. We've all been in locker rooms. Those tackles get banged up. Here's the thing about finding linemen. This is where, to me, your scouts are in the money because, quarterbacks, everybody kind of knows who they are. Tackles can come from anywhere. Donald Penn came from Utah State. Joe Staley came from?
One of those Michigan.
Central Michigan, right? You can find them, in all kinds of places. Your scouts need to go find them, and I think in the lower rounds, that's when you do pick them. I'm confident in those scouts. We know those scouts.
I don't know the scouts.
I don't know the scouts either, but we can find them, and when you go to mercurynews.com, we will be telling you about that, won't we?
Maybe, theoretically.
I like the sound.
Might say it on TV instead.
Exactly. That's a good idea.
Absolutely.
I like the sound of that. So, Mark, we're going to stick with you here. Just about a month ago, you were out in the desert in Las Vegas at the NFL owners' meetings. The vote came through. It wasn't a quiet offseason. We knew this was probably going to happen with the Raiders, so they're moving to Vegas. In recent weeks, there hasn't been too much news considering the fallout for the fan base, the franchise. Mark Davis saying he was going to, preach to fans why this decision happened. I don't know if we've really heard too much into that. How does this affect the draft for the Raiders whatsoever now, knowing that their future is in a few years in another place?
I actually think those guys are in a bubble that Las Vegas, to them, is so far off in the future. Jack Del Rio said to us in Arizona when I was there, how many of these guys on our team now do you think will even be playing in Las Vegas? Every year, it's like a third of the roster turns over. We were guessing maybe 15. Jimmy Durkin and I were sitting around, and Jerry McDonald. Maybe 15 of the current players will actually be on the roster in Las Vegas. These guys are locked into what they have to do for this season. No, I don't see that. It's more of a thing with fans, and boy, are the fans... the emails I get, and I can't wait till this fall when the Las Vegas Raiders T-shirt people show up from Las Vegas and they're mixed in the parking lot with the Oakland Raiders T-shirt. That's the real. I want to draft some of those guys to come in and play for the team because they're going to be fired up.
And the Raiders already establishing a bit of their Las Vegas footprint. On day 3, they will be announcing their draft picks from underneath the famous "Welcome to Las Vegas" sign.
How do you think the Oakland Raiders fans feel about that?
I would not want to be there. Would not want to witness that. So the Raiders have their change. Tim, we'd be remiss to talk about the 49ers and the change of hands in leadership. you've been through a lot of these drafts with Trent Baalke in previous years, and now we hear from John Lynch, and he's giving us some more insight, and there seems to be a lot more intrigue being built up to what that number 2 pick can be. Kyle Shanahan, a very busy offseason for him, coming in trying to figure out, okay, how do I establish my Super Bowl contending offense here in Santa Clara? How do you evaluate where they're at, 3-4 months into this thing?
Well, we're going to find out a lot starting on Thursday what they do with that second pick. Do they trade down? Do they take the Solomon Thomas, who sends the consensus pick, defensive lineman, yet another defensive lineman? Do they take Mitchell Trubisky, which was the rumor earlier this week? I think the interesting difference is with Baalke, he didn't say anything publicly. Nothing. He hated to talk publicly. Everything leaked, and you kind of knew what they were going to do. With this organization now, with Lynch and Shanahan, they are very transparent. Talking, they're happy to talk this week, but they're insistent that they're not going to leak. And this Trubisky thing was an interesting leak. Now, either that's a smoke screen that they want people to think that they're going to draft him, so someone's got to trade up with them, which I think is the most likely, or it did leak through some other way. And if they end up drafting Trubisky, they've got a leak there that they've said they wouldn't have. So that's what I love about the draft, other than who times and weights and side to side motion, all these things, hip swivel. That stuff that plays out over years. What we figure out on Thursday, Friday, Saturday is an X-ray of the team's mindset. What are they really going to do? What are they really thinking? Yeah, and I think we will see. I'll be there Thursday. What they do with 2 is going to be fascinating. I think they want to trade down. I think they want to pick up some extra picks. Maybe you get your quarterback at 12, at 14, at 18. I think that's what they'd like to do. Can they deal themselves into that position? Is this all part of it? We don't know yet. We don't know how good John Lynch is at this. Maybe he's really good. We're going to find out Thursday.
That clip where they came in and sat down at the table.
Yeah, they sat down with command. They sat down with command. Better than we sat down. It's a good thing the camera wasn't on it. Way better than Mark and I sat down.
And I guarantee you this, Tim will agree with that. Yes, the draft is a truth serum, but no matter who they draft, they'll come out and say they got exactly the guy they wanted.
Right.
They got the guy they wanted.
If we would have rolled exactly how we wished, this is it. But they're sending it too. So they're right at the precipice of this draft. A lot's going to happen after what they do it too, because we think we know what's going to happen at 1.
All right, so a busy Thursday coming up on top of the Warriors playoffs here in the Bay Area. We now have the NFL draft coming up on Thursday, so teams will begin to know their fate just after 5 p.m. Pacific time on Thursday. The San Francisco 49ers kicking things off here for our local teams at number 2. Be sure to give all of our guys a follow on Twitter, Tim Kawakami, Mark Purdy, Cam Inman, Jerry McDonald, and Jimmy Durkin. They will be stationed across the Raiders and 49ers headquarters, bringing you the latest on the NFL draft. Be sure to join us here next week on Bay Area Insiders as we dive in further with the Warriors on their playoff run. For the Bay Area News Group, I'm Courtney Cronin. Thanks for watching.